She said our marriage lacked excitement and questioned whether I could ever offer more. I calmly reviewed our legal agreements, closed joint credit lines, and expanded my investment holdings. Months later, she reached out when excitement arrived without equity, ownership, or long-term security. I was raised by a father who made impulsive decisions and a mother who cleaned up after every single one of them. I watched my father chase excitement my entire childhood. New business ventures, new cars, new women, new cities. And I watched my mother hold everything together with overtime shifts and silence and the particular exhaustion of someone who loves a person they can't fix. When I was old enough to understand what I was watching, I made a decision. I would not be that man. Not the chaos. Not the electricity. Not the thrill. I would be the man who showed up, who stayed, who built, because I had seen with my own eyes what excitement without foundation actually costs. But Nora hadn't watched what I watched, and I never explained it in terms she could feel. That was my failure. I own it. 3 weeks after the night, she called me predictable. She said something worse. We were in the car, driving back from dinner at her parents' house. It was a quiet drive, not tense, just quiet, the kind of silence that used to feel comfortable between us. She was scrolling her phone. I was watching the highway. Then, without looking up, she said, "I've been thinking about what I actually need from a relationship." I kept my eyes on the road. "Okay," I said. "I need someone who challenges me, who pushes me, who makes life feel like something worth experiencing." I let a few seconds pass. "Do you feel like I don't do those things?" She finally looked up from her phone. "I feel like you could maybe do them, but I'm not sure you're capable of it. I'm not sure it's in you." The highway stretched ahead, straight and long and lit by headlights. I questioned whether I could ever offer more. Those were her exact words. Not cruel, just honest. And honesty, when it carries that particular weight, lands differently than cruelty ever could. I nodded slowly. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just drove us home. And when we got inside, she went to bed and I sat in the kitchen for 2 hours doing something she would have never expected. I opened a new document, and I started writing a list. Not an emotional list. Not a list of grievances or feelings or things I wish she understood. A financial list. Joint accounts. Credit cards with both our names. Property. Investment accounts. Insurance policies. Beneficiary designations. I went through everything we had built, methodically, carefully, without a single drop of sentimentality, and I assessed where I stood. Not because I had already decided to end the marriage, but because I had watched my father exit 3 relationships with nothing but a duffel bag and a story, and I had promised myself that if I ever found myself in a position where a door might be closing, I would not be caught unprepared. My father used to say knowledge is power. He just never applied it to himself. I was going to apply it to myself. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved quietly. Not visibly, not dramatically, just quietly. I scheduled a consultation with a financial advisor I trusted, a man named Victor who had helped me structure my investment portfolio 3 years prior. I told him I wanted to review everything. He didn't ask why. That's one of the things I'd always respected about Victor. He understood that sometimes clients needed to recalibrate, and he didn't require an emotional explanation to help them do it. We met on a Thursday afternoon at his office downtown. He spread everything out across his desk. I walked him through what I was thinking. I wanted to close the joint credit line Nora and I had opened 4 years ago, the one we'd originally taken out to fund a kitchen renovation and had never fully paid down. I wanted to move the majority of my individual investment contributions from the joint brokerage account into a solo account I had opened years before the marriage. I wanted to update beneficiary information on my 401k and life insurance policies to reflect my sister, Claire, as primary beneficiary rather than Nora. Victor looked at me across the desk with the calm expression of a man who had seen versions of this conversation many times before. "Is this a precautionary measure, or are we looking at an imminent separation?" he asked. "Precautionary," I said. He nodded once. "Then let's make sure the precautions are airtight. I want to be very clear about something. I did not do any of this out of revenge. I did not do it out of spite. I did it because I am the son of a woman who spent 40 years of her life being financially unprepared for the consequences of someone else's decisions. And I swore on the day I buried her that I would never be in that position. My mother passed 4 years into my marriage. Breast cancer. It was fast, faster than anyone told us it would be. I drove to Michigan every other weekend for 8 months. Nora came with me twice. The first time, she was supportive. The second time, she spent most of the visit on her phone in the car outside. She said hospitals made her uncomfortable. I said okay. I held my mother's hand without her. And I told myself it was fine. I told myself people process grief differently. I told myself I was not keeping score. But the body keeps records even when the mind decides not to. And somewhere underneath all my practicality, I was keeping score. Not consciously, but absolutely. In the month that followed my conversation with Victor, I noticed something changing in Nora. Not dramatic changes, subtle ones. She started going out more with friends on weeknights. She started protecting her phone the way you protect something that has secrets in it. She started smelling different when she came home. Not perfume, just different. A cologne that wasn't mine. I am not going to say I knew with certainty what was happening, but I will say this. When you are paying attention, really paying attention, the story reveals itself without you having to pry. I didn't follow her. I didn't check her phone. I didn't install anything, spy on anything, or make any kind of dramatic confrontation. I went about my days. I went to work. I'm a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm that handles commercial real estate investment. I ate lunch at my desk. I worked late. I went to the gym. I came home, and I kept moving the pieces on my own side of the board into better positions. There was one evening, maybe 6 weeks into all of this, when Nora and I were watching television together. It was the first night in weeks where things felt almost normal. She was laughing at something on screen. Her feet were tucked under a blanket. For a moment, it looked exactly like the marriage I thought I had signed up for. I almost said something. I almost reached over and touched her hand and said, "We could fix this. Tell me what you actually need. Let's try." I almost did it. But then she looked at her phone, smiled at something on the screen, angled it away from me, and typed a response. And the moment passed, and I understood, with a clarity that felt almost cold, that I was watching the ending of something. I just didn't know yet how far the ending had already gone. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Saturday morning in September. I had made coffee. She came downstairs in gym clothes, grabbed her bag, and said she was going out for the day with friends. Which friends? I asked. Not accusatorially, just casually. She hesitated. It was barely a second, but I caught it. Melissa and a couple of people from her gym, she said. I nodded. Have fun, I said. She left. I waited 40 minutes. Then I called Melissa. Melissa and Nora had been friends since college. Melissa liked me. More importantly, Melissa was not a particularly good liar when put on the spot. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, she said. Hey, I said. Is Nora with you? She forgot her jacket and I wanted to drop it off. Silence. 2 seconds too long. Oh, Melissa said. She mentioned she might swing by later, but she's not here yet. I said, oh, okay. My mistake. Tell her I called. Sure, Melissa said. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a while. I finished my coffee. Then I opened my laptop and moved the remaining balance from our joint savings account into my individual account, leaving exactly half of the shared funds, which was what I was legally and morally entitled to as a co-owner. Not $1 more, not $1 less. I had already consulted a family law attorney the week before, a woman named Diane who specialized in asset protection in marital dissolution cases. Diane had laid out my options with the same calm efficiency I appreciated in Victor. She explained what I was entitled to. She explained what Nora was entitled to. She explained the difference between separate property and marital property in the state of North Carolina. And she told me that the cleaner I kept my own financial picture, the cleaner any eventual separation would be. I was not going to hand anything over by accident. Nora came home at 8 that evening. She smelled like the same cologne. She seemed energized in a way she hadn't been in our house in a long time. She talked about her day in the vague, animated way people talk when they're describing a version of their day rather than the actual day. It was so good, she said. I just needed that. To get out. To feel free. I'm glad, I said. She looked at me. I think she was waiting for a reaction, for jealousy, suspicion, a fight. I gave her none of those things. I handed her the glass of water I'd poured for her when I heard her car in the driveway. She took it. She went upstairs, and I sat back down at my laptop. His name was Brennan. I found this out not through surveillance, but through a moment of ordinary carelessness on Nora's part. She left her email open on the shared computer in the home office one afternoon, the desktop we both used for printing and document storage. I wasn't looking. I was printing a contract, but the browser was open, and the name was right there in her inbox. Brennan Colt. Subject line. Last night was exactly what I needed. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I printed my contract. I logged out of the browser. I went back to my office. And I sat with the information the way you sit with a diagnosis you already suspected. Not shattered, not even entirely surprised, just still. The way a person gets still when they understand that the decision they've been quietly preparing for has just become necessary. I want to talk about Brennan for a moment, not because he matters in the way people might assume, but because understanding who he was helps explain what came later. I did what any financially literate person with access to public records would do. I looked him up, not in a stalking sense, in a due diligence sense. Brennan Colt was 37. He worked at a craft spirits brand as a brand experience director, which, as far as I could tell, meant he planned events, traveled frequently, and had an Instagram full of rooftop parties and motorcycle pictures and beach shots taken in locations that suggested he'd never spent a weekend reviewing quarterly returns in his life. He had filed for personal bankruptcy at 32. He was currently renting a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood of Charlotte where I knew the average tenancy was under 18 months. He had no visible long-term investments. He had no property. He had, by every measurable metric I could assess, the financial profile of someone who spent everything he earned on looking like he earned more. He was exciting. I will give him that. On paper, the kind of paper Nora was looking at, he was everything I wasn't. Spontaneous, glamorous, untethered. The kind of man who calls at 10 on a Tuesday and says, "Get in the car, we're going to the mountains." The kind of man who seems to live entirely inside the present tense. What Nora didn't see, what she wasn't interested in seeing, was that the present tense is extremely expensive, and someone always ends up paying the tab. I filed for divorce on a Wednesday in late October. I had been working toward this moment for 3 months. I had reviewed every account, every asset, every liability. I had documented everything that needed documenting. I had closed the joint credit line 2 weeks prior, informing the bank that I wished to remove myself from the account, which transferred full liability to Nora. The account had a balance she was going to have to manage on her own. I had moved my individual investment accounts, updated my beneficiary designations, restructured my retirement contributions, and had Diane review every document before I signed anything. When I walked into Diane's office that Wednesday morning, I wasn't nervous. I was ready. She slid the petition across the desk. I signed it. She filed it electronically before noon. Nora was served at our house 2 days later by a process server. I had moved into a furnished apartment the day before she was served. I didn't take everything. I took my clothes, my electronics, my financial documents, a few books, and the coffee maker, because it was a good coffee maker and I had researched it for 6 weeks before buying it. And sentimentality aside, I was not leaving it. I left a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "My attorney will be in contact. I hope you find what you're looking for." Not cruel, not cold exactly, just honest. The kind of honest I had been learning from her. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way I hadn't expected. I had anticipated drama, angry phone calls, confrontations, mutual friends picking sides. What I got instead was a strange, suspended silence. Nora called once in the first week. I let it go to voicemail. She said, "I think we should talk before this goes further. Please call me back." I texted Diane's contact information and said all communication should go through counsel. That was our last direct exchange for 4 months. The divorce proceedings were not pleasant, but they were clean. That was the word Diane used. Clean. Because I had prepared. Because there were no joint debts that caught me off guard. Because the house was technically in my name. I had purchased it before the marriage and Nora had never been added to the deed, which we had never gotten around to formalizing and which now turned out to matter enormously. She was entitled to a portion of the appreciation of the property over the course of the marriage. I paid it, without argument, because fighting over numbers I could calculate was not where I intended to spend my energy. We split the joint savings, each taking our half. The joint brokerage account was valued and divided according to North Carolina equitable distribution law. The credit card balance that had been transferred to her sole name, Diane ensured that remained with her. By December, we had a signed separation agreement. By February, the divorce was finalized. I'm going to pause here for a moment and tell you something that I think often gets lost in stories like this one. Divorce, even when it's necessary, even when you've prepared for it, even when the other person made it inevitable, divorce is still a form of grief. You don't go numb and move forward cleanly. You carry the weight of 8 years. You carry the memory of who she was when you first met her. You carry the moments that were real, and some of them were genuinely real. The trip you took to Portugal 2 years into dating. The night you sat on your apartment floor eating takeout, and laughing so hard you couldn't speak. The way she used to fall asleep with her head on your shoulder during long drives. Those things don't evaporate because the legal document says they're over. You grieve them. And then, if you're disciplined, if you're structured, if you are the kind of person who has always found steadiness and forward motion, you build. By spring, I had converted the home equity I'd received in the settlement into 2 investment properties, a duplex in a growing area east of Charlotte, and a long-term rental single-family home on the outskirts of the city. I worked with a property manager I trusted. Both properties were occupied within 60 days of closing. I had also taken the financial breathing room created by the removal of Nora's spending patterns from my household budget. And yes, she had very particular spending patterns, and directed that into a broader investment portfolio. Victor and I met quarterly now instead of annually. I was not trying to become wealthy as a form of revenge. I want to be clear about that. I was doing what I had always done. Building. Not for someone else to see. Not for validation. Just because it was the only way I knew how to be. It was my sister Claire who told me about Brennan. She called me on a Tuesday evening in July, 9 months after the divorce was finalized. I ran into Nora at the farmer's market, she said. Okay, I said. She didn't look great. That's not really my concern anymore, I said. I know, Claire said. I'm just telling you because I think she's going to reach out. She asked about you. Like asked. I set down the investment report I'd been reading. What did she say? She asked how you were doing. If you were seeing anyone. If you seemed happy. What did you tell her? Claire made a small sound that was somewhere between amusement and protectiveness. I told her you seemed fine. Which is not a lie. Good, I said. She also said things with the guy didn't work out. She said it in this tone like she expected me to be surprised. I was not surprised. I had expected this outcome from the moment I looked up Brennan Colt's bankruptcy filing. Men who live entirely in the present tense are exceptional at beginnings. They are constitutionally incapable of middles. Did she say anything else? I asked. She said she made some mistakes and that she's been doing a lot of thinking. Claire paused. I told her I was glad for her. And then I bought my tomatoes and left. I laughed. Actually laughed. Genuinely. Good, I said again. The call came on a Thursday morning in early August. My phone showed her name. She'd never deleted her contact from my phone, and I'd never deleted hers either, not because I was holding on a hope, but because it seemed unnecessarily theatrical. I answered. Hello, I said. Hi. Her voice was careful, softer than I remembered. Nora. Yeah. A pause. I know this is probably not what you want. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. But I needed to say some things. I sat down in the chair at my desk. Okay, I said. Say them. She was quiet for a moment, as if she'd rehearsed, and now the rehearsal was failing her. Things with Brennan ended, she said. I heard, I said. Yeah, of course you did. She made a short sound. It wasn't what I thought it was. He was great at the beginning. He was exciting and fun, and everything felt so alive. But then life started happening. Bills. Decisions. The kind of things that require you to actually show up consistently. She paused. And he couldn't do it, she said. He just couldn't. Every time things got real, he found a reason to be somewhere else. Something exciting was always more important than something stable. And I started to realize. I waited. I started to realize that what I had confused for a lack of excitement was actually just steadiness. And I didn't know how to appreciate steadiness because I'd never understood how much work it actually requires. I listened to the sound of her breathing through the phone. I'm not calling to ask for anything, she said quickly. I'm not asking you to take me back or to have any kind of conversation that you don't want to have. I just wanted to say that I was wrong, that I said things that were unfair, that you deserved better than what I gave you. I thought about a lot of things in the silence that followed. I thought about the kitchen table on the night she called me predictable. I thought about the car ride home from her parents' house. I thought about the coffee maker I'd taken when I left. I thought about 2 years of small comments accumulating like water damage behind drywall. And then I thought about my mother, sitting at a kitchen table not unlike mine, making calculations on a notepad about which bill to pay and which to defer, because the man she loved had spent everything on something that felt exciting in the moment. I appreciate you saying that, I said. Do you mean that, or are you just being polite? She asked. Both, I said. I do appreciate it. And I'm also being polite. She made a sound that might have been a small laugh. How are you? She asked. Good, I said. Really good, actually. Claire said you bought some properties. 2, I said. Of course you did. There was something in her voice, not bitterness exactly, but something adjacent to it. The kind of sound someone makes when they understand they've made a mistake that has already been permanently filed under consequence. I've been renting since everything. It's fine. It's good for now. I just didn't realize how much of what I had was. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I know, I said. She asked, carefully and with what sounded like genuine self-awareness, whether there was any version of a conversation we could have. Not about getting back together. She was clear about that, or as clear as someone can be when they're navigating that much ambiguity in real time. She said she missed having someone in her life who actually knew her. She said the last year had been lonely in a way she hadn't anticipated. She said she'd been in therapy, that she'd been working through some things about her own patterns and what she actually needed versus what she had always convinced herself she needed. I respected all of that. I told her so, but I also told her the truth. I'm not angry at you, I said. I genuinely mean that. I processed most of what happened during those months before I filed. By the time I handed you those papers, the grieving was already mostly done. I wasn't acting out of anger. I was acting out of clarity. I know, she said quietly. And I think that's also why I can't go backward, I said. Not because I'm punishing you, but because I built something after you left, not out of spite, just out of who I am. And that version of me doesn't have room to go backward to a version of us that required me to be smaller. She was quiet for a long moment. That's a very you thing to say, she finally said. I know, I said. Is it okay if I say I kind of wish I'd understood that version of you while I had it? You can say it, I said. I won't pretend it doesn't land somewhere. But understanding something after it's gone is a very expensive kind of learning. She agreed. And then, because there was really nothing left to say that wouldn't just be two people reopening a wound for no practical purpose, we said goodbye. Politely. Finitely. With the kind of closure that doesn't erase everything, but at least puts it in the right drawer. I've thought a lot, since that call, about what the whole arc of this experience actually taught me. Not what it taught me about her. What it taught me about myself. I came into that marriage with a set of values I had built around an architecture of protection. Stability over spectacle. Substance over surface. Building over consuming. Those values came from real places, from a childhood of watching the alternative play out with devastating consistency. But I had never once explained them in a way that invited someone else to understand them. I had lived them silently and expected the results to speak for themselves. And when Nora looked at my results and saw boredom instead of foundation, I didn't have the language to correct her reading. That was real. That was mine. I'm not absolved of it just because I came out ahead financially. There was a version of our marriage where I could have opened the laptop less and opened my mouth more. Where I could have said, this is why I am the way I am. This is what I'm building and why it matters to me. This is what I need you to understand about where steadiness comes from. I never said those things. And she never asked. Two people failing to speak the same language isn't always one person's fault. Sometimes it's both. But I will also say this, and I'll say it plainly. The moment she started looking for someone else to answer a question she never asked me directly, that was not a communication failure. That was a choice. And choices have consequences. And consequences do not apologize for existing. It's November now. 14 months since I moved out of our house. 11 months since the divorce was finalized. I am sitting in the living room of a different home, smaller than the house we shared, but mine in a way the house never fully felt, because this one I chose entirely for myself. The duplex east of Charlotte is fully occupied and cash flowing above projection. The single-family rental has a long-term tenant who just renewed their lease for a second year. My investment portfolio has grown at a rate that would have made the version of me sitting at that kitchen table feel vindicated and slightly lightheaded. I'm dating someone. Carefully, slowly, with a deliberate absence of urgency. Her name is Petra. She's 32. She works in urban planning. She is not chaotic. She is not electric. She is thoughtful and funny and asks good questions and listens to the answers. And when I tell her about the way I think about money and the future, she doesn't look at me like I'm furniture she's tired of. She looks at me like I'm saying something interesting, which, after everything, feels like the most profound luxury imaginable. Brennan Colt, as of the last public record I had any reason to check, is listed as currently residing in Atlanta. A new city, a new beginning, same pattern, different backdrop. I don't say that with contempt. I say it with the particular clarity of someone who has looked at a financial profile and recognized the story it tells without needing to read a single caption. Some people optimize for today. Some people optimize for tomorrow. Neither is inherently wrong. But you should understand which category you fall into before you choose someone to share a life with. Because eventually tomorrow arrives. And it arrives with a ledger. And the ledger does not care about what you felt in the moment. If you're reading this, or rather, if you're listening to this, and you recognize yourself somewhere in it, I want to be careful about what I say next. Because the easiest version of this story is a simple one. Steady, responsible man. Ungrateful, chaotic woman. Karma arrives on schedule. Narrator wins. But that's not the full truth. The full truth is messier and more human. I was not a perfect husband. I was a consistent one. But consistency without communication can look a lot like absence from the inside. She was not a villain. She was a woman who didn't understand what she had until she'd replaced it with something that looked better and fell apart immediately. That's not evil. That's just the particular tragedy of not knowing how to read what's actually in front of you. The thing I would tell the version of myself sitting at that kitchen table with the laptop open and the cold pasta beside it. Put the laptop away more often. Not because it doesn't matter, but because the person across the room is also an asset. And assets require attention. And the ones you neglect long enough either depreciate or find another portfolio. That one cost me, and I own it. The same way I own the duplex, the rental, the investment accounts, and the coffee maker. Fully. Without a co-borrower. Without a second signature. And without the very particular silence of a house that once had someone in it and now doesn't. I'm going to end this the way it actually ended. Not with a dramatic confrontation. Not with a speech I gave her that she had to stand there and absorb. Not with any kind of visible triumph. It ended on a Thursday morning on a phone call. With two people who had loved each other and failed each other, and in the process revealed to themselves exactly who they actually were. She found excitement. It arrived without equity. It arrived without ownership. It arrived without the long, patient, unglamorous architecture of long-term security. And when excitement packed a bag and moved to Atlanta, she understood something she couldn't have understood before she understood it. I don't take satisfaction in that. Not the way the story might seem to suggest I should. What I take is something quieter, something more personal. I take the knowledge that I did not become my father. That when the floor shifted beneath me, I did not run towards something that felt good. I ran towards something that would hold. And it held. It holds. That's the whole story.